I need you to forget everything you think you know about this war. Forget the cable news graphics. Forget the missile footage. Forget the talking heads arguing about whether this was justified or reckless. Because what I'm about to walk you through is something almost nobody is explaining. Welcome to our channel, BI and Data Science. We create education videos on AI, and we are making this in-depth US-Israel-Iran war analysis as it has deep, significant relevance of AI and geopolitics that every AI analyst should diagnose. This is not a war between two countries. This is a systems collision between six forces that are about to reshape your life, whether you live in Tehran, Tel Aviv, Dallas, or Shanghai. Here's what I mean. On one layer, yes, this is about missiles and military strikes. The US and Israel launched a major offensive against Iran on February 28, 2026. They killed the supreme leader. They hammered missile sites, naval bases, and security infrastructure. Iran fired back, not just at Israel, but at Gulf states hosting American military assets. That's the surface war, the one with explosions. But underneath that war, 6 invisible engines are running simultaneously that I will analyze in this video. 1. Who controls global energy choke points? 2. Whether cheap weapons can bankrupt expensive empires. 3. Whether America can fight here and still contain China over there. 4. Whether AI becomes a tool for human progress or gets fast-tracked into autonomous killing machines. 5. Whether domestic politics is shaping military decisions more than strategy is. 6. Whether ordinary citizens are slowly losing power to a permanent war machine. By the end of this video, you'll understand why a drone that costs less than a used Honda Civic might be the most important weapon on Earth right now. It has a huge impact on the development of AI and mankind's future. For AI-related educational content and news, please subscribe channel and hit the notification bell so that you do not miss any in-depth analysis. Here's the key idea that unlocks everything. Every war is fought on 2 levels, the official reason and the structural reason. The official reason is always security. The structural reason is always power. Hold that frame, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Washington and Jerusalem will tell you the official version, and honestly, it's not wrong. Iran's missile program had crossed red lines. Their nuclear timeline was accelerating. Their network of armed groups stretched from Lebanon to Yemen to Iraq. For Israel, this wasn't a distant threat. It was an architecture designed to surround them. Fair enough, that's real. But if you're a systems thinker, and that's what we're going to be for the next 30 minutes, you have to ask a harder question. Why now? Why not 2 years ago? Why not 2 years from now? And the answer is because multiple strategic clocks all hit midnight at the same time. Clock 1, nuclear. Iran was getting closer. Every month of delay made the military option more expensive and more dangerous. Clock 2, political. The US is entering an election cycle. Wars launched early in a political window give leaders maximum time to shape the narrative before voters judge the outcome. Clock 3, regional. Years of proxy conflict had already weakened some of Iran's networks. If you're going to strike, you strike when the enemy's peripheral shields are already cracked. Clock 4, great power. China is rising. Russia is distracted in Ukraine. The global power board is shifting. If America is going to make a major move in the Middle East, the window where it can do so without triggering a great power counter-response is narrowing. Clock 5, and this one almost nobody is talking about, technology. The people running this war understand something most civilians don't. Future wars won't be won by the biggest aircraft carrier. They'll be won by whoever has the best data, the fastest drone swarms, and the most scalable production lines. That's 5 clocks, all ticking, all converging on the same month. That's not coincidence. That's strategic alignment. Now, let me introduce the variable that connects this war to every economy on Earth. Oil. A Strait of Hormuz. Tiny little waterway. About a fifth of all global oil and liquefied natural gas passes through it. When this war started, tanker traffic through Hormuz collapsed. Gulf producers, Kuwait, Iraq, Qatar, scrambled into defensive postures. Oil prices surged. Analysts started throwing around numbers, Brent above $100, maybe $120 if disruptions persist. Now here's where I need you to think like a game theorist, not a news consumer. Ask yourself, who gets hurt most when Middle Eastern oil becomes unpredictable? It's not America. America produces its own. It's China. China's industrial machine is ravenously energy hungry, and it imports a massive share of its oil from the Gulf. So any prolonged Hormuz disruption doesn't just raise gas prices, It puts strategic pressure on Beijing's entire industrial base. I want to be precise here. There is no current evidence that Washington launched this war primarily to throttle China's energy supply. That would be an overclaim. But it is absolutely defensible to say energy instability in the Gulf is a side effect that happens to benefit American strategic competition with China. And in geopolitics, convenient side effects have a way of becoming quiet objectives. And now connect that to AI. Because AI is not just code. AI is electricity. It's chips. It's cooling systems. It's data centers the size of football fields, consuming the power output of small cities. When energy gets expensive, scarce, or weaponized, the AI race stops being about who has the smartest engineers and starts being about who has the hardest infrastructure. The war touches AI not just through battlefield robots. It touches AI through the global energy system that makes compute possible. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. Does war benefit the people who start it? Historically, almost always, at least in the short term. There's a phenomenon political scientists call the rally around the flag effect. When a nation goes to war, the leader's approval almost always spikes. Media coverage shifts from scandal to patriotism. The opposition faces a brutal dilemma: criticize the war and risk looking weak, or fall in line and lose leverage. In this case, the reporting shows exactly that pattern emerging. Congressional Republicans have rallied behind the president against war powers' challenges. Domestic scandals have been pushed below the fold. The White House now controls the narrative tempo. Now, I want to be careful. Some people claim this war was launched specifically to distract from one controversy or another. The Epstein files, the economic numbers, whatever. I'm not going to make that claim because the evidence doesn't support that single cause story. But here's what I will say, and this is actually more important. You don't need a conspiracy theory when you have structural incentives. War consolidates executive power. It redirects public attention. It expands emergency authority. It sidelines opposition. And it does all of that automatically, regardless of the original motive. That's not a conspiracy. That's a feature of how states work in wartime. And there's a second engine running alongside the political one: capital. Think about the mechanics. War burns munitions. Burned munitions create procurement orders. Orders create contracts. Contracts create revenue. Revenue creates lobbying power. Lobbying power creates more contracts. The Pentagon is already pushing defense firms to speed up production after this operation drew down stockpiles. The administration is meeting with executives from major contractors. A massive supplemental spending package is on the table. Does that prove corruption? No. But it confirms a material reality that's been true for decades. Prolonged conflict mechanically enriches the defense industrial base. Every interceptor launched is a reorder placed. Every drone shot down is a budget line justified. And the market knows this instantly. Defense stocks don't rise during wars because investors are patriotic. They rise because investors price expected demand. More missiles used equals more missiles bought. More drone threats equal more anti-drone contracts. More AI targeting equals more software procurement. War doesn't just destroy, it reallocates capital. And if you're not tracking where that capital flows, you're missing half the story. Now we need to walk into the minefield: religion. And I'm going to say something that might make both sides of this debate uncomfortable. Religion is real. Faith is real. But the moment geopolitics puts on a religious costume, every off-ramp in a conflict starts to disappear. Here's what's happening. There are factions, particularly within parts of the evangelical Christian right and some maximalist pro-Israel circles, that frame Middle East conflict in civilizational or even biblical terms. The U.S. ambassador to Israel made comments suggesting Israel had a biblical right to territory far beyond its current borders. Those comments were condemned across the Middle East as inflammatory. And on the other side, Iran's theocratic establishment frames its resistance in religious terms too: sacred duty, martyrdom, cosmic struggle. So yes, religious apocalyptic framing exists on multiple sides. Yes, political actors exploit it. Yes, symbolic narratives about Persia, prophecy, chosen peoples, and sacred history shape how millions of people emotionally process this war. But, and this matters enormously, it would be lazy and inaccurate to say that any one religious community wants this war. That's too sweeping. The real dynamic is more precise. Religious narratives are being mobilized by specific political factions to give civilizational urgency to a conflict that is fundamentally about power, geography, and resources. And here's why that's so dangerous. When a war is framed as policy, you can negotiate, you can compromise, you can trade concessions. But when a war is framed as destiny, compromise becomes heresy. Deterrence becomes theology. Retaliation becomes righteousness. And every possible off-ramp looks like betrayal to the true believers. That is one of the most powerful escalatory engines in human history. Okay, now we get to what might be the single most important military insight of this entire war. And almost nobody in mainstream media is framing it correctly. Forget who has the bigger army. Forget who has the fancier jets. The question that actually decides this war is, who goes broke first? Let me explain. America builds the most sophisticated military systems on the planet. Carrier strike groups, stealth bombers, THAAD and Patriot air defense, satellite-guided precision strikes, AI-assisted targeting. The Pentagon reportedly used Anthropic AI services during the Iran strikes. We don't know exactly how, but the fact that it's happening tells you this is already an AI-shaped war. That's the world's most expensive military machine, and it's extraordinary. But here's the problem. What is the future doesn't belong to the side with the most exquisite systems, but to the side that forces the other to spend itself into exhaustion. This is Iran's actual strategy, not battlefield victory. Cost imposition. Cheap drones, cheap missiles, high volume, continuous pressure, saturation attacks. Picture this. Iran launches a drone that costs about as much as a used Honda Civic, maybe $30,000, $50,000. To intercept that drone, the US fires a missile that costs several $1,000,000. Do that math 100 times, 1,000 times. The exchange rate is devastating. The exact ratios vary by system, so I won't give you one magic number. But the broad pattern is real and well documented. America's defense architecture is stunningly capable, yet economically mismatched against mass low-cost attacks. You're swatting mosquitoes with golden hammers. And here's the part that should terrify every Pentagon planner. It's not just about unit cost, it's about production speed. Iran and its allies can manufacture cheap drones at industrial scale. They're basically weaponized consumer electronics. Meanwhile, the US Interceptor supply chain is constrained, specialized, and slow to ramp. Lockheed Martin is scaling PAC-3 Interceptor production to 2,000 per year, but that increase comes too late to solve this year's shortage. This is why Iran's real strategy isn't about planting a flag on some hill. It's about turning the war into a bleeding equation. Force the US and Israel to keep spending, keep intercepting, keep deploying, keep absorbing economic shockwaves, until the political cost of continuing exceeds the strategic value of winning. That's not blitzkrieg. That's algorithmic attrition. And it's exactly what the US experienced in Afghanistan. Over 20 years. Except now, the math is even more lopsided, because the adversary's weapons are getting cheaper, while the defender's interceptors are staying expensive. This is why the Pentagon is urgently pivoting toward cheaper, AI-guided anti-drone systems and studying Ukraine's low-cost interceptor innovations. Because the generals know the current model doesn't scale. Let's zoom out to the planetary level. Because while the world stares at Iran, someone else is doing math. Every time America enters a major conflict in one region, every rival on Earth pulls out a calculator and starts measuring how distracted Washington just became. And the most important calculator right now is in Beijing. Allies in Asia, including voices in Taiwan, are openly worried that a prolonged Iran war will sap American military resources and weaken the deterrence shield in the Indo-Pacific. And that concern isn't theoretical. Carrier deployments, missile inventory, air defense stockpiles, political bandwidth, all of these are finite. If more flows to the Middle East, less is available for the Taiwan Strait. Now, is China happy about this war? It's not that simple. China is heavily dependent on Gulf energy imports. Chaos in the Middle East can spike China's energy costs and threaten supply chains. Beijing has been urging Gulf states to resist outside interference and has evacuated thousands of its own citizens from the region. So China's position is a paradox. High oil prices, bad for China's economy. American military diversion, good for China's strategic room. Regional chaos, bad for trade. US overextension, good for relative power. The result isn't simple support or simple opposition. It's what I'd call opportunistic watchfulness. Beijing doesn't need to fire a single shot to gain from this war. It just needs to wait while Washington pours interceptors, naval assets, and political capital into the Persian Gulf, and then calmly expand its leverage around Taiwan without triggering a response. The same logic applies to North Korea. When American focus pulls away, the perceived threshold for testing, probing, and pressuring drops. This is the part that most war coverage completely ignores. Middle East conflict is no longer a regional affair. It's directly linked to Indo-Pacific deterrence. What happens in the Strait of Hormuz changes the equation in the Taiwan Strait. And if you don't see that connection, you don't understand the real stakes. Now, let's talk about the clearest indirect winner of this entire war: Russia. The logic is almost embarrassingly simple. When Gulf oil gets disrupted, prices rise. When prices rise, Russia, one of the world's largest oil exporters, makes more money per barrel. And that money doesn't go into hospitals and schools. It goes into sustaining Russia's war in Ukraine. Oil isn't just money. Oil is war finance. So Russia's advantage is twofold: higher energy revenue and greater Western distraction. If US attention and weapons supply tilt toward the Iran theater, Ukraine gets squeezed from the other side, not with bullets, but with budget priorities. And it gets darker. Reports have surfaced that Russia may have provided Iran with targeting information on US military positions. If true, that's not just passive benefit, that's active coordination to raise costs for Washington. But here's where the story gets truly wild, because the feedback loop between these wars is one of the most remarkable strategic circuits in modern history. Follow this chain. Iran develops cheap attack drones. Iran shares drone technology with Russia. Russia uses those drones against Ukraine. Ukraine, out of sheer survival necessity, invents some of the world's best low-cost drone defenses. Now the US is turning to Ukraine for that expertise to defend against Iranian drones in the Middle East. Iran's weapon became Russia's tool. Russia's use of it created Ukraine's adaptation. Ukraine's adaptation is now being imported by America to fight Iran. That's a closed strategic loop. That's the network's nature of 21st century warfare. And it tells you something profound about where we are. No conflict is isolated anymore. Every battlefield is a classroom for the next one. One of the most underestimated consequences of this war is what it's doing to alliance trust. Gulf states, Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, have tried to stay out of direct combat. But Iran's retaliation has already landed on Gulf cities, ports, and energy sites. US partners are now paying a real price for hosting American military infrastructure. This cuts two ways. Being attacked by Iran could harden Gulf alignment with Washington. See, we told you Tehran was the threat. But if American protection starts looking more expensive than protective, if these countries are taking hits because of Washington's war, some may start hedging, diversifying security relationships, rethinking their exposure to US strategic decisions they didn't choose. And that matters for technology flows too. Gulf sovereign wealth funds are massive investors in US-linked AI, infrastructure, and frontier tech. If those investors become more cautious, more politically uncertain, or more vulnerable to attack, capital flows could shift at the margins. Not a confirmed trend yet, but a reasonable inference when your business hub model is being rattled by drone strikes. Now India. And I'm going to push back on a common take here. Some analysts say India's relative quiet means it sided with America. But just days ago, India allowed an Iranian warship to dock at the port of Kochi as a humanitarian gesture, right after the US sank an Iranian vessel near Sri Lanka. That's not picking a side. That's classic Indian strategic ambiguity. India has ties with the US, ties with Israel, energy dependence on the Gulf, legacy relationships with Iran, and a deep interest in not letting the region burn. So India's silence isn't surrender to one bloc. It's calculated optionality. But if this war drags on, India feels it through every channel: oil prices, shipping disruption, diaspora risk, and regional economic turbulence. Nobody gets to stay neutral when the world's energy arteries are bleeding. Now I have to take you somewhere uncomfortable, because the worst-case scenario isn't the one you think. The worst outcome of this war isn't that one side wins and the other loses. It's that nobody wins, and the war never fully ends. US intelligence assessments are reportedly skeptical that bombing campaigns and leadership kills will actually topple the Iranian state. History backs that up. Decapitation rarely produces regime change. More often, it produces hardened survivors, militia fragmentation, and prolonged instability. So the likeliest dark scenario isn't clean victory, it's chronic managed conflict, a wound that never quite heals. Not enough to trigger full mobilization, but enough to keep emergency logic permanently activated. And here's what that world looks like. Security states expand, slowly, steadily, permanently. Defense budgets normalize upward and never come back down. Civil liberties erode incrementally, not in one dramatic moment, but through 1,000 small adjustments you barely notice. And the public is told this is the price of safety. Meanwhile, the machine evolves. More autonomous drones, more AI-assisted targeting, more algorithmic kill chains, more robotic warfare systems, more energy demand to power it all. The Pentagon is already moving AI-guided anti-drone systems from Ukraine's playbook into the Middle East. AI services are already embedded in strike planning. And here's the final devastating irony. AI is sold to the public as productivity. War funds it as urgency. Civilian markets talk about co-pilots and assistants. Militaries talk about kill chains and autonomous engagement. Both need energy. Both need chips. Both need compute. Both need state backing. So if war accelerates both defense AI and energy nationalism, it could also accelerate the return of nuclear power politics. Because AI-hungry economies and war-hungry states both crave the same thing: stable, massive baseload energy. That's a strategic inference, but it follows directly from the collision we're watching. The most dangerous thing about this war isn't the body count, though the body count is horrific. Massive civilian casualties, displacement across Iran and Lebanon, humanitarian corridors shattered. The most dangerous thing is that this war may reorganize political life itself. Ordinary people lose bargaining power. Governments, militaries, surveillance networks, and defense contractors gain more of it. So the question isn't just who wins this war. The real question is, what kind of world does this war make normal? A world where energy choke points decide who leads in AI. A world where drones that cost less than a car exhaust empires that cost trillions to maintain. A world where long wars strengthen executives and defense contractors while citizens foot the bill. A world where great powers quietly profit from each other's distractions. A world where religion is weaponized to make compromise impossible. A world where you finance the machine but never get to steer it. That is why this war matters far beyond Iran. It's not a regional episode, it's a prototype. A prototype for the architecture of the next decade. Oil, AI, deterrence, supply chains, executive power, industrial capacity, and the price of being unprepared for a world where technology has made conflict cheaper to start, harder to stop, and easier to normalize. If you liked our analysis, comment our views, and spread the channel with your friends. We will see you in another AI video.